I thought of something that was a part of what we did as a team today in call coaching, was giving critical feedback on some of the call coaching that we were doing. We found it was a lot easier to give feedback when the person wasn't there and be honest with the call. And I thought it was interesting going through this chapter that giving critical feedback, like there's definitely a tactful way that you have to go about it, that someone's going to be open and accept that, instead of either think I'm not good enough at this, like I'm incompetent, or be defensive and be like, no, I'm right. So Morgan said it like, hey, I really want our team to have that relationship where we can have this kind of feedback, and it's not like, oh wow, good thing no one else was on here so we could like say that, give some good feedback on this. Like if we could have that on our team and still find a way, like, hey, let's give some good feedback on this, like still be positive with it. I think that would really help. So not even just in leadership, but within our teams, it's really key to have that way of going about giving our feedback and helping each other be successful in our roles.
Nice. Cresser and I were talking, and it seems like this would be a great topic for onboarding of new DSRs, and just how to have supportive conversation with other members of your team, because we give each other feedback all the time and share best practices. And then as well as how do you give feedback to your AE or your manager or Justin or other director or someone like that, to try to make, if we're all, like you said, Lauren, the goal being to build nurturing relationships that are positive, even though we have to give each other critical feedback because we want to improve, that would be a really good skill for everyone on the team to have.
Kind of to that point that you just made, there's strict feedback. Well, no, maybe not necessarily strict, but feedback that sometimes we have to give that might not be super fun. But is there like an appropriate ratio? Like if some type of feedback was given that maybe it was executed well and perfectly, but the person still kind of might not have taken it super well. Is it like, combine that with like 2 positive feedbacks later down the line to kind of keep things happy and smooth? Or I don't know, is there like a ratio that we should be focused on so that it's not just negative feedback or just positive feedback?
This takes me back to my net new days. Byron, I feel like you took a LinkedIn training on this, and I can't remember what you said, but it was like for every piece of negative feedback you give someone, you need to give them 5. That sounds like a lot, but was it like 4 or 5 pieces of positive feedback or something like that?
That's a jewel of an insight that I don't remember anymore.
I think you said it specifically to me, so I don't know if that meant anything, but I don't know. It just brought me back.
Yeah. I can tell you, Logan, I've made mistakes not giving enough positive feedback. And that even though I felt like I was doing a really good job on giving that critical feedback and following all the principles that I knew, it's emotionally draining to receive any type of negative feedback, because we try to do it nicely and supportively, but I think that's a really good insight. I don't have an answer. Maybe I'll have other experiences you could share around that.
I have a couple. So Logan, so in my past experience, it depends on what type of feedback you're giving. So if it was something that's like maybe a skill or a result piece of feedback, like that's maybe a little negative, then they always talked about being very direct and making sure that you share effective first and like more effective second. Or they talked about doing like the effective sandwich, where you would do an effective piece of feedback and then a more effective and then an effective. So I think it kind of depends on the situation, what you're addressing, what you're communicating, because you also don't want to just add the positive feedback to buffer what's hard to say.
Yeah.
Because then they can get conflicting like messages. Like, so you say I'm great here, but so what's the issue? Like, I'm confused. So in my experience, I don't think that there's a right or wrong. I think it's like, what's the content of what I'm discussing? how does the person typically receive feedback, and then maybe adjusting it based on that.
Yeah, those are great insights. And what I've noticed in the past, even outside of work, but if I get like too much positive feedback, then suddenly I get too confident, and that's bad for me, or too much negative feedback, and then it's, I lack that confidence, and it's harder for me to like, progress and keep moving. So it really is an art, but I think it's one that, developing is pretty important for me, so that I can, make sure people feel comfortable, but also willing to change when necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I think being genuine is really important when you deliver feedback. Like, I think, and that goes really well with what Carly was saying. Like, if you're just giving a piece of positive feedback so you can deliver some negative feedback, I think people pick up on that. And I've even been in situations like that where it's like, you're really, really good at this, you're so good at this, but, and then they kind of tell you what they really wanted to tell you. And so I think that's one thing that I've learned is like, just be genuine about it. And it's easier said than done, but I think if people know that it's coming from a place of like, I want to help you, and it's constructive rather than I just want to make you feel dumb or put you down, I think people appreciate it, even though they may not react super positively in the initial interaction. I think they'll appreciate it down the road.
I like that.
I sometimes think of it as weakness based. Like, there's certain principles of supportive communication that I know I'm not as good at as other principles. And so I might do things, instead of necessarily balancing the negative and positive feedback ratio, I'll focus in on, I gave them feedback. I don't think I quite was congruent enough in that feedback. So I'm going to go and do these activities throughout the rest of the week to try to build that congruence. And then like what Josh was making the joke about being invalidating. But if I know I do have a weakness in calling people idiots and not really meaning it, but it's demeaning, right? And sometimes, hopefully not. But then I'll work on doing something on the opposite of that later on. So think about that too as you look at the supportive communication thing. It might not necessarily be that it was negative or positive feedback, but that they weren't being as supportive in certain situations. And so it started to wear on you in that process.
Well, I really also appreciated at the very beginning where it really just talked about the value of the interpersonal relationships. And it didn't really, it did go into, having a positive interpersonal relationship, but positive can mean the ability to give that critical feedback too, and do it in that positive way, and how important that is. So I just really appreciated that. And I agree with what you just said too, Byron, where there are, as I'm reading through this chapter, I'm thinking, I am not good at this. Okay, I'm pretty good. Okay, there. And I tend to lean on the ways that are comfortable and that I feel like I can do well. And then leaning into the ways that are more challenging, it's hard, but reading through it, you really see the value of all of these different styles and techniques that are definitely important in leading a team and making sure you've built that trust so that you can provide all of those types of feedback. So